There it is. All right, welcome. Good morning. We are going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to start with Commissioner Lowry and Seth Henshaw.
Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Chris Lowry. I am the relatively new Commissioner for Higher Education, a little over 7 months into this role. It's nice to see all of you this morning. I've not had the pleasure of working with some of you, and some folks on the committee I've been working with for decades, so I look forward to getting to know all of you better. As the chairman noted, I have with me today Seth Henshaw, who I think most of you know. He is our CFO and previously worked for the State Budget Agency, Senate, and the House. In addition, I'm so pleased that we have some of our commission members who have joined us today, in addition to staff, our past chair, Mike Alley, Dr. Ed Berger, and Nancy Jordan, and we may see a few other folks slip in during that time. I especially want to note that they're here, and this, I hope, for all of you will characterize that we have been listening. I have been listening, our team, including to the help and guidance and counsel that our commission members have given us. They have been highly engaged, I know, during my 7 months with commission, and they've been at the center of the work we're going to be sharing with you today. On this slide, you'll see we reference the funding formula, but again, listening is something we wanted to underscore for you. I'd like to tell you the number of meetings I've had, and they're just dozens and dozens with policymakers, leaders from our state higher education institutions, the presidents, many of them multiple times, other leaders, businesses, business leaders, and others to really understand what the state of our higher education is in Indiana, what the challenges are, and what we could be doing to address them on behalf of our fellow Hoosiers. The first thing that we'll touch on, because I think it's significant, is relative to Senate Enrolled Act 366, about which I know you're all familiar, and the interim study working group that came out of that. There were a set of recommendations that came from that you can see in front of you, but talked about the codification of a outcomes-based performance funding formula, creation of a report around its efficacy and what we're getting from it, and certainly invited the CHE to be really engaged. We have been trying to do that. We take very seriously what 366 brought forward. Seth, by the way, will add as we go along here. And please ask questions if you wish. You know, one of the things we wanted to start with to sort of ground this, I think we used a couple of these slides up in Lake County a couple of months ago when we were with you, but was to say, where are we in the state? Several years ago, our state adopted what has been referred to as the big goal. It was a challenge by the Lumina Foundation to the states around the country to have a post-secondary attainment rate of 60% by the year 25. Our state stands at 48.3%, and that's predicated on having the talent pipeline that we need for a thriving economy and for economic social mobility for our citizens. We stand at 48.3% today. Let me be clear, we will not reach that goal by 2025. That is a challenge, and I think it's our responsibility, the commission and their hiring of me, to really lean into that. We are, as the numbers say here, 39th, out of 52, that's 50 states plus Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. That ranking has also not really changed in the past decade or so. These are some key numbers that we wanted to share with you. I think many of you have seen them. I think maybe even some of these have been quoted most recently on Organizational Day. The college going rate in Indiana, just like in other states, has been in decline. And when I say college going rate, that is individuals who are graduating from high school and moving on to training and education beyond high school. So it's not just a traditional college or university. It might be for a certification, associate degree, bachelor's degree. And that has been declining. We started at a lower point and are at a lower point than the national average. As you can see, 12 points over 5 years. This chart does not show that it's 15 points over 10 years. In addition to that, we still have nearly 2 million working age Hoosiers who are without a credential beyond a high school diploma. What is concerning about this is we know that our economy is becoming more tech-oriented, whether that's in advanced manufacturing, where I spent 20 years of my career with publicly traded Hillenbrand, to logistics and supply chain, healthcare, and literally across the board. The challenge will be that too many Hoosiers will not be able to adjust to and have the skills to thrive in this economy that's emerging without paying attention to that. In addition, the next set of numbers on the lower right-hand portion of this slide were some that I found really interesting. I was much more familiar with the declining going rate before I came into this role, and the fact that we have nearly 2 million working age adults without something beyond a high school diploma. What I really didn't understand very well until a few months ago was related to the retention of our college graduates. This question was asked of me in a setting, talking with business leaders. So, Chris, how well are we at attracting students? And by the way, how well do we do at keeping our students once they graduate? And I said, I have no idea. Well, so the first half of this is we're pretty good, our public and private institutions, at attracting talent from out of state. And one of the things I find interesting about that is, and I've, maybe like many of you, I have really grown tired of people saying, well, we don't have oceans and we don't have mountains. Well, there you go. And I've lived here all but a year of my life, and I find Indiana to be an exceptional place to live, work, and play. We have an ability to attract individuals to our state through our higher education institutions. They're seen as a good value between the quality of those institutions, the ways in which they've held down tuition costs and others. And I'll talk just briefly about that in a moment. A challenge, though, that we have is that gap between where we rank in terms of attracting students to our state and keeping any of our graduates. Just quite bluntly, I think we can do better. Our institutions are focused on this. Some of them have been hyper-focused on this. I think you'll hear, I don't want to steal any of their thunder, but just some of the exceptional work the institutions are placing on working with employers, businesses, and others to help students stay here, to fill the jobs here, and live and become part of our social fabric here in Indiana. We've got work to do, and I've been candid. I always try to be candid and transparent in my conversations and relationships with business leaders, that they too have got to engage more so with the institutions. And some of you, again, I've known for a long time. I have some experience in that. I led those efforts at Hill and Brand for the last 5 years while I was there. And it takes effort on both sides, whether it's the employer or whether it's the institution, and those of us in public policy to push everyone to do better. Seth, thank you for getting to the next slide. These metrics I found pretty interesting. We started digging into this spring economic and social outcomes of post-secondary attainment. You know, beyond just thinking and saying we should have a lofty goal of 60% post-secondary attainment, my question was, what does that mean? What does that mean for individuals? What does that mean for employers? And what does that mean for our economy? I think there's some clear distinctions here. Indiana is fortunate and continues to be fortunate to have a low unemployment rate, has generally been leading amongst, in the nation with one of the better lower unemployment rates. But it is significant to point out the differences in unemployment, labor participation, and these other numbers based upon educational attainment. These numbers, I think, are from the latest October report that the state produces. You can see the unemployment rate differences. Of course, they fluctuate, from month to month. But one that I have found perhaps getting the most attention when I talk with employers is the labor participation rate differences. I believe we stand at about 63, a little over 63% labor participation as a state. However, when we look at educational attainment, the gap really widens. Someone, and these are Indiana data in those two columns, with less than a high school diploma, the labor participation rate is 43%. You can see it's almost 73% for bachelor's degrees and higher. You can read into those what they are. We have a problem with the talent pipeline, having enough talent. I hear from employers every day, pardon me, and I'm sure you do too. Then the wage premiums have consistently been there. You see a 13-point spread between a high school diploma, again, these are median, and some college or an associate degree, and between a high school diploma and bachelor's degree and higher, it's an 84% wage premium. These calculate and trace out to a number of factors. You see net worth. There are also a number of social factors. We won't share the slide of that today, but we'd be glad to do so, whether that's life expectancy, whether that's infant mortality, and other things that are associated with educational attainment. Seth, thank you. Indiana ranks 42nd in higher education funding. Seth will correct me if I get into details here that I am incorrect about, because he has had years of experience in these numbers. That does include
Financial aid?
It includes financial aid, and I'm sure you all know, and I brag about this and our state all the time, including to a reporter this morning. We're first in the Midwest and fifth in the nation on need-based financial aid. And certainly if anyone has questions on calculations of these and so forth, I believe these numbers came from...
Yep, from SHEO in the Chef report.
Yes, so SHEO is the State Higher Education Executives Organization that compiles a lot of this work on a national basis. Something else that I found interesting, and again, I really had no idea about, is the way in which our state institutions have responded with tuition increases over the past 5 and 10 years. As I began to go and talk with the presidents, I was asking about what they were doing around quality, career relevance, affordability, and I had been at Ivy Tech, and I knew we put the pressure on keeping tuition costs low. I knew of the stories of Purdue University. They're widely known, and you can see here when adjusted for inflation, Indiana has been performing very well. You can see the numbers in front of you, and they are adjusted for, yes, they are adjusted for inflation. So what we thought we would do is start with an institution summary, and that is for the 7 institutions, and talk about those things first, recognizing the time. We'll then get to the agency requests that we have relative to the budget, but this is really at the heart of what we're talking about. We have 4 key areas we'd like to talk with you about today: repair and rehabilitation, dual credit, capital projects, and then operating funding, where we'll talk about the previous performance model, one that is being proposed today, principally to address 2 key areas that I've already touched on. One are considerations from Senate Enroll Act 366 and the working group, and also some of those distinct challenges we see in Indiana, not only the completion, but also the front end of the pipeline with the college going rate and adults, and then on the back end side of that, looking at retention of our graduates.
So the commission is recommending the traditional 0.5% over the biennium of academic capital asset value, which is approximately a $10 million a year increase over 2021 appropriation levels. 3% of that $10 million is actually just unfreezing the R&R allocations, which were frozen in 21 to 2019 levels. And then the additional 7%, around $7 million, is actually caused by the inflator index that we use to turn 1,900 built building and try to identify its value for allocating R&R in the formula. And so over the last 2 years, as you can imagine, we've seen substantial construction cost increases, which has led to that $7 million adjustment. And so that brings us to that total of 10.3. And here you'll see the allocation of those dollars in the proposed biennium.
In the area of dual credit, we are recommending to move that funding from $45 per credit hour up to $50. I believe in the last budget session, it was adjusted from $40 up to $45. It began, my understanding is, as a result of a study around a decade ago, looking at the cost of dual credit. It was pegged at $50 at that time, was cut to 40, brought back to 45 in the last budget session, and we're requesting it at $50, and you can see the total increase is approximately $3 million. So the capital projects, Senate Enrolled Act 366 and the Working Committee also charged the Commission with, frankly, finding a better way to think about capital projects. What I guess has been fairly traditional for many years is to request, for the Commission to request, and for you folks to consider the top priority project of each institution. We're doing that today. 2 years ago, I think because of the economy, no capital projects were either requested or approved. What's significant, I think, out of 366 and the requirement to come back to you is that we're charged with coming to you by the next biennium, it will be before that, with a recommendation on how to think about capital projects differently. I will just, again, be very transparent and candid with you. 20 years working in business in a publicly held company, we simply did not at the corporate level grant in this manner. There were a number of things which we assessed: what the organization needed, what the total capital expenditure was we were considering. So a number of variables. There are other practices around the country. We need to look at those. We should have business involved in saying, how should we consider this? Because these are investments that lead to the creation of talent pipeline for us, that also lead to research that can be coupled with our employers in Indiana. So all of that to say, we're bringing forth this recommendation until such time that we come back with you with a recommendation on how to look at this differently. We're going to be counting on working with each of you, working with our commission members, working with the institutions, looking at national best practices, also working with businesses to understand what might be a new way forward in capital. And in the meantime, as I said, we're bringing forth those two. I think it's important to point out that 5 of the 7, and Seth, correct me if I'm wrong, essentially involve renovation. I know some of the campuses, and President Ellspermann will probably talk about this, some of the institutions are actually eliminating square footage. I won't, again, steal her thunder on that, but I think 5 out of 7 are rehabilitation or renovation, and 2 are new physical plant. Right, Seth? That's correct. Okay. Oh, okay. Want me to wait for a second? Would you like me to keep moving until the screen is ready, Mr. Chairman?
We're on slide 15.
Yes, we're on slide 15, principles for a proposed model. When we look back to the working group of Senate Enrolled Act 366, there were some considerations, my understanding, I wasn't involved in this, but around focusing on institutional mission differentiation, looking at data that would be more recent in terms of judging how an institution is doing. You know, the data we utilize today, which is of course focused around completion and with subcategories, is sometimes as old as a decade. If I'm not mistaken, one of our institutional presidents has actually been in his role for a decade. So looking at data that's more recent, there are challenges with that. I wouldn't deny that at all. Measuring individual institutional improvements against themselves rather than against others, and no reallocation in the process. So you will see, again, we have tried to listen to what those recommendations and discussions were that were coming out of the working group. In addition, on the next slide where we talk about a little bit of a timeline, there's more detail there than I will go over, but again, glad to if you wish. We're also trying to address the challenges that we pointed out. Again, going rate, adults still on completions, not letting up the gas there, and also trying to retain just as many of our grads as possible. Our work began, this says March through May. I wasn't at the commission until the end of April, but Seth and the team and commission members began bringing me up to speed. And you know, I think one of the most significant things was to run a new data set back in that time frame. In June, really April through June, really meeting with the university presidents, many other stakeholders on these topics. And, you know, something I would point out again, because, and for your information, this is probably something our staff gets tired of hearing, but I want to be transparent, I want to be candid, and I want to have information, hopefully, to folks sooner than later. We don't always deliver on that. The reason I mention that is even some of the preliminary projections that would have come out in late fall of this year around the funding model, we published in June, I think, Seth, and we knew that was early, but we would rather have you know, folks involved seeing that information. Our commission voted to move forward with the model we're going to share with you in a moment back in August, which is a hybrid model of transitioning from the outcomes-based performance model that we have today, again, focused on completion, to having a broader view of it. Commission also voted to approve the structure of what you're going to see on the next page in the pipeline that we have. You will see on page 17, I know we'll get to it on the screen in a moment, but the pipeline that we've created to sort of illustrate this, you know, we know there's a lot involved that higher ed needs to speak to in the economic the way in which our economy thrives here in Indiana and the way in which it thrives on behalf of the folks we serve, our Hoosiers, our fellow Hoosiers. And as we look at it, though, it is a pipeline. There is an entrance to that pipeline. Again, you've heard me discuss 53% high school going rate. That is part of the enrollment challenge that we find, whether it's the 53% or adults. And again, thinking of mission differentiation, that differs by campus and by institution. From a completion standpoint, you know, we have the overall attainment rate of 48.3%. In terms of completions have been improving in Indiana, but let me be clear, they are not good enough in my view. We have work to do in all of these areas, and we're going to keep focusing on that. On-time completion, overall, completions by adults, low income, looking at these things. Oh, thank you. Good. Thanks, Zach. We have the slide deck up on the screen. And as we think about that, I believe has much to do with the throughput, the degree to which we have persistence, and the degree to which we have these students who can be, you know, part of our economy here in Indiana. We talked about 40th in the retention of graduates, and in that bucket around really sort of the economic outputs of it, having the talent pipeline, you know, having those students be in front of employers in front of those students to help them stay here rather than going to neighboring or other states when they're completing, and also on research. The U.S. leads in research, and a great reason for looking at the reasons that the United States leads on research is there's a really interesting intersection between the private sector and what our higher education institutions do in that regard. We know that from various studies and research, and I personally know it from my experiences in the corporate world for about 20 years. This next slide has a lot that we would like to share with you. As we look at the new model moving forward, what we're proposing, as we saw on slide, I won't go back to it, Seth. What we're proposing is a 1% funding allocation each year in the biennium toward the model that we have had in place, which focuses on completion only. So we are thinking of this model as a transition between where we were and where we would like to go, focusing, again, on the whole pipeline, not just the throughput side of it. But 1% per year allocated toward that model, the previous funding model, but with no reallocation, again, trying to listen to what we heard and have had conversations about with some, including some of you in this room, about no reallocation. And then you'll see sort of our, I guess, typical footnote about what that excludes. We are also then, as the other half of this outcomes-based performance funding model, proposing 3% in the first year and 4% in the second year with no reallocation based upon the kind of metrics that we discussed a moment ago. The input side of it, focusing on enrollment being the high school going rate and adults, the completion metrics we talked about, and then on the other side of it with the outcomes, the economic outcomes, graduate retention, and measuring research. Anything to add, Seth? Okay. In addition to that, and as part of our recognition of a transition here, we know change is difficult, and I'll be the first to recognize that. And as part of the recognition of that change, and also part of recognition of the increased costs that our institutions have incurred, we're recommending a base adjustment to funding of 2% in the first year and 3% in the second year. Again, really with two things in mind there, and again, including those elements you see at the bottom of the slide. The last slide on this portion of it that we thought was instructive to share is that from an outcomes-based performance funding construct, change has been normal over the past many years. There's a lot of detail, and I promise you I won't go row or column on each of these, but rather to indicate to you this formula, this intent of paying for what we value as a state has changed. If there's been something consistent about it, it has been that it changes, hopefully to adapt to the kind of economy, the kind of workforce we need, and what we believe you charge the institutions and our agency with doing.
Thank you, Chris. Very quickly, I'm going to go over the agency side. We've just spent some time working through the higher education institutions budget proposal from the commission, and I want to walk you briefly through some items for consideration more directly related to the commission as an agency. Specifically, there's three categories of funding that we're looking to find support for. The first is in three programmatic areas: the Workforce Ready Grant, the Adult Student Grant, and the Earn Indiana Work Study Program. As some of you may be aware, the Commission for Higher Education entered into an agreement with the state budget agency to receive around $40 million of pandemic federal funding, which we were able to primarily use to expand these programs, both in eligibility but also just in scope. And so as you can imagine, we were very impressed by the demand and the take-up of those programs, especially the Workforce Ready Grant. But now that those federal funds have expired, the $1 million a year for the non-credit bearing Workforce Ready Grant program in particular is experiencing significant demand beyond our ability to support. The Earn Indiana Work Study Program was expanded to include high school students, and again, this program provides funds to employers to help cover internships and externships at employers, directly aiming at the in-state retention of our graduates and the workforce pipeline. I'll probably let Chris talk a little bit more about this, but something that we've heard very loud and clear based on work done during the pandemic through research with the institution and several partners is the questioning of the value of higher education. It's a common conversation that we have in the commission and we hear from employers and community organizations. And so this request of $5 million represents our sincere effort to try and begin addressing that and helping to inform the public not only about the programs and opportunities that Indiana offers through financial aid, but also about the value of the outcomes of those credentials and degrees. Additionally, we're requesting administrative support really in two categories. One is a restoration of the 10% administrative reductions that the commission experienced in the 2021 budget session, which will also go a long way towards ensuring that our administrative costs are coming out of administrative buckets and not being shifted to programmatic funds. Additionally, allowing us to address increasing costs from everything imaginable at the commission as well. And then finally, something I want to highlight is the commission's looking for support on a number of staffing positions, specifically tied to a number of programs what the commission has received over the last 10 years or so. I think if you look back around a decade, our staffing is very similar to what it was then, but we have, I think, 17 new programs that we're responsible for administering. And so not only will this help us to maintain, but this will also help us to grow efforts and initiatives that we believe and the commission believes are important regarding outreach, technology, and infrastructure of information.
And I will add two very quick comments to the things Seth referenced, the marketing communications grassroots effort. I think there is something that is very Hoosier oriented. Our institutions offer a good value. We lead in need-based financial aid. The options are good. And I don't know if it's Hoosier humility or what, but there are far too many Hoosiers who don't know what's available. And I think that's at an individual level, it is at an employer level, and it is every week that I hear from folks when I'm talking in small and large groups that they didn't know. They didn't know about this or that that is available, and I think we need to address that. You know, concerns about affordability, again, we're trying to do everything we can to make post-secondary training and education opportunities available and affordable, and also really talking about what the true costs are. And then from a staffing standpoint, and I know some of you and I have talked about this, I did a bit of reorganization back at the commission in the summer, and two, I believe, really critically important roles that we added with the resources we already had were to create an associate commissioner of K-12 strategy and an associate commissioner of adult strategy who, all I can be is blunt, that I expect to wake up every day on behalf of Hoosiers and think about how we can better serve students coming through high school with post-secondary education and training opportunities, and the same for adults who are going to need additional skills in order to really thrive in our economy.
And so finally, we have a summary outlining kind of by funding type the requests being made today for a total of $135 million of new funding in '24 and $157 million of new funding in fiscal year '25, or around 6.5% and 7.5% new funding for higher education. And then included, I'll just wrap up by showing, we also have included an outline of the impact by institution of that higher education operating summary. And then I'll just note that for both the 24 and 25 column, those green boxes, the 3% and 4% for perspective or this kind of proposed model represents the maximum funding that an institution could earn.
I would just make a couple of quick closing comments before any questions you might have. But we realize this is a significant request for investment in higher education. We believe it is not only an investment in higher education, but quite literally around the economic future of our state. We have something very good in this state. It's a business-friendly place. Talent pipeline is something about which I hear every day. I'm sure we all do. We're looking at maintaining the roughly 12% of the state budget that we are today as higher education. And again, I would close. I'm not sure if any of my additional commission members arrived while I was talking, but again, significant to know that this is the work of our commission, specifically our Budget and Productivity Committee that has been pushing me from day one, as they should, to be looking at what our challenges are in Indiana, to be listening to what all of you have put forth in Senate Enrolled Act 366 and in other conversations, but also doing so in partnership with our university and college partners to really put our best foot forward, do so as well as possible on behalf of our fellow Hoosiers. Again, thank you for the time before you, and I look forward to working with all of you as you proceed into the upcoming session.
Thank you, Mr. Lowry. Seth? I've got a few questions. So on page 4, you show the decline in enrollment. Do you think that has anything to do with the recent sharp increases in wages?
Senator, I think that's a great question. I think there's some factor to that, but what is really interesting about the youth or the college going rate is that when I was first asked that question, I think maybe it was at an Indy Chamber event this summer, I said, I have no idea. And I went back, asked our business intelligence team, so could you tell me those 18, 19, 20-year-olds, are they instead opting to go into the marketplace because wages have increased? And they came back and said, actually, labor participation rates for individuals of that age in our state have been declining also in the past few years. I don't know how else to put it other than I was really disappointed. That's not what I expected. I really actually had no idea. But we can also get those numbers for you. I wish I had them for you today. And I would add this too, Senator, it wasn't in your question, but I feel compelled to add it. Those declines, whether it's the college going rate or whether it's labor participation, the degree to which they've been declining have been even steeper for young men.
Okay. Thank you. Then page 7, you show that we have a decline in our tuition support from the state. So I guess I look at it as the big picture. So we have capital, we have tuition support, we have R&R. So if you add all that together, and you might not have it here, is that something you can show us where we rank in the total picture, not just tuition support?
We can absolutely pull that. I guess I'll add a little clarity. So the two slides, slide 6 and slide 7, includes higher education operating and student financial aid. So those are the two major categories. For Indiana, of our $2.2 billion in higher ed, that makes up roughly $2 billion of it. We'll absolutely look into that for you. I can tell you that there are a number of analyses that we would love for SHIO to help us to dive into. What we have found is some of those analyses, especially in the 2-year side, become very, very difficult because of the complexities of funding sources and the way in which different states handle their systems of higher education. 4-year comparisons are much more easy to get access to, but we'll certainly look into that from the whole kind of state investment into higher ed perspective.
And then you say R&R at 0.5%. Now, is that over the biennium? So do you mean 0.25 per year?
Correct.
Okay, so that's the same. And then, so page 15, you talk about the reallocation for the, or having no reallocation for the performance-based funding. And when we started digging into this, it was, the answer I got was the reason it was reallocated because in that particular year, there was no new money. So one thing I would suggest that, and I'm a big fan of not reallocating the existing funds and using new money for performance-based. However, I would probably put something in there that says if there is no new money in a particular due to economic reasons, that there could be a reallocation. So there's some, so we still have a performance metric even if there's no new money. Hoping that doesn't happen, but it did. It could happen again. So I'd probably leave that open.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. One thing I would also add is we didn't get into the weeds today, but I think we talked a little bit at the Budget Committee meeting in October, is one part of the proposal for this new model is the inclusion of a non-reverting fund so that dollars that are not earned by institutions in the original biennium would have an opportunity the following biennium to earn them. The one nice thing about that is it gives a little bit more, it gives additional opportunity for institutions to earn those same dollars. And the other thing that's nice about it is it allows us to have a funding mechanism of new money still that the institutions have not already received, should there be no additional state dollars available the following biennium. But your point regarding if there are no dollars available and still prioritizing performance is absolutely well received.
I'd still leave that if your little savings account's empty and there's no new money. I'd have that as just a backstop, last resort. The next thing I would ask, a common question we ask all the agencies, so if enrollment's down, why would you say the percentage has to increase for tuition support? If the enrollment's down, what's your answer to that?
Take a step.
Yeah, I think it's an ideal question for any of our institutions. I'm guessing, and I've not been one of the university presidents, but they'll talk about some costs that, just remain as part of overhead. I remember 12 years on a school board. I used to press on that question all the time, president of the school board, and then getting into discussion, we tried to limit to 25 kids in a class, but certain costs are going to be there, whether we had 22 or 23 kids or whether we had 25. But Senator, I think it's a great question, and I'm sure the presidents listening are going to also be eager to dig into that.
My last thing, more of a comment. So it seems like we have a gap. So K-12 is trying to get the kids there, and higher ed's trying to grab those kids, but there seems to be a gap between the two. Is that, I'm looking at your marketing and your things like that, is that what you're trying to get, is that gap, the ones that are falling between those two?
Yes, Senator, that's very much part of it. And again, some of you know this, but Secretary Jenner and her team and our team and I have been spending a lot of time together, including on those goals for students to graduate from high school with a high-value credential, but to also be much more coordinated in the way we work with K-12. Back to the one position I created, an associate commissioner of K-12. We stole Michelle Ashcraft from Purdue University because she was doing an amazing job there and was interested in this challenge, and that is exactly part of what we're trying to do, is just be much more seamless, as part of this talent pipeline in helping our students have better opportunities once they complete high school.
Well, I just want to compliment you. From day one, you've hit the ground running. I mean, we met early on. I had a board meeting at IUSB yesterday. Your name came up. You've been out there, and so I want to commend you for the work you've done in the short time you've been here. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Any questions? Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Commission for Higher Ed, I guess my concern is twofold. So you are now going to be the marketers for all of our colleges in Indiana in terms of getting students to the 5 million. I mean, that's your thrust. Go to college, get a 4-year degree.
Yeah, Senator, I think the marketing and recruitment of students to a specific institution because of their strengths, whether it's engineering at Purdue or perhaps the Kelly School at IU, too, they're easy to reference. They're going to continue and need to continue to market specific programs, reasons for coming to their campuses, their institutions, and so forth. Ours is really aimed more so at helping Hoosiers see the value of higher education. So our entity did some research before I arrived, and the value of higher education has been called into question. What was interesting to me about that research is that it only echoed what Strata Education, Gallup, Pew, and others have said, and trying to build that value so that folks know employers in their own communities will have greater opportunity of hiring them, the economic outcomes, and so forth. And it's a lift, but I think we have to do that in partnership with the institutions.
I don't disagree, but in my community, I have IU Fort Wayne, Purdue Fort Wayne, St. Francis, and Indiana Tech. So it'll be interesting to see how you market that. I guess my concern is I feel like that's the high school's responsibility. if we're really getting our message out that having a four-year degree is the most important thing for the future of Hoosiers and Indiana, because even having a two-year degree in your statistics don't really raise you up in terms of the economic development side, right? And also in terms of what our employers and our state needs. So you're going to do this. The colleges are not obviously able to finish the job because enrollment continues to decline. It was declining pre-COVID. It's continued to decline in terms of those attaining. And as you said, they're not working. They're not doing anything. So that's a problem. So the colleges haven't quite figured out how to get those kids. I understand that. But then we also have our high schools who, what job are they doing to make sure that that's a priority? Because at the same time, we have the mixed message of the credentialing. And you are now starting, in my opinion, to becoming a DWD agency. So you're putting out these workforce development grants. Aren't you sort of counter-messaging exactly what your purpose should be?
Senator, I think, again, these are great questions. I think the General Assembly has charged us with having responsibilities for those short-term credentials, obviously, that are post-secondary, whether it's a one-year certificate on up to what we think of traditionally with associate and bachelor's degrees. So we're trying to take into account that it's all of the above that the economy needs. I think it's fair to say for a long time it was college only. I grew up in that era, and that's what seemed to be the only message. And then at times there's been a shift to only short term, when in reality businesses are telling us every day we need both of those. I think I couldn't tell you the history of why the commission was selected to be the administrator of those. And also glad to talk about the sort of the grassroots effort around the marketing. High schools have a responsibility, our institutions do, but we also see in a number of communities around the state just fascinating, wonderful work being done by community and faith-based organizations, by philanthropy, to lean in and support what the school, like the high schools are doing, what the other institutions are doing to help students see the pathway to college. And the one I think of off the top of my head, and he couldn't be here today, is our commission member, Dennis Bland, who runs the Center for Leadership Development just about a mile and a half from here, a couple miles from here. All that to say, part of what we're trying to consider is that government can't be the only answer to this. Our institutions, including K-12, cannot be. Business can have great impact. One of our other members, I don't know if he walked in, Dan Peterson from Cook Medical, I think they've shown remarkable progress. And then philanthropy and community and faith-based organizations which are eager. And I think we have to not only be willing to take their help, but to listen to what ideas they have, that we're not going to create a solution in a vacuum.
No, I certainly agree with that. I guess my frustration is we continue to cross-message ourselves. And I think there's a point where your agency should be looking for the four-year degree. And every time economic development leadership forums are held in my district, that's what they talk about. And that's what the rest of the country looks at, is our bachelor's attainment, et cetera, and then higher, right? Which may or may not be part why our colleges, once they graduate from here, we don't retain most of our graduates. Because it's that cart and the horse. Do we have a business here that can support all the bachelor's degrees we're turning out? But at the flip side is, I understand we need the credentials and we need the workforce development types of training that they get. Certainly in my district, again, a highly manufacturing intense district. But that's a lot of things to stick on the wall from your agency. And that's what's distressing to me, because at the end of the day, and this is what I'm going to be concerned about with we're spending so much money on 21st Century O'Bannon, veterans, scholarships, et cetera. And so you talk about retaining the graduates and they graduate, but I didn't hear you say anything about your retention rate in college.
Yes.
And we are horrible. We are horrible with that. I tell people if you are at a point where financially you are not able to afford to go to college, in this state, it's almost virtually possible to go for free because of this kind of support that we give, which I think is unprecedented, to your point, right? Compared to other states. So we can sell that all day long, but if we don't retain those students in college, it's money not well spent. And I would imagine if we don't follow them after, I would imagine then we're just paying for them later in adult ed or trying to get them a credential to do something, because they've left after a year or two with no degree, right? Not even associates. So what are you doing to retain those students?
Senator, I think it's a great question. Completions, persistence and completions have been a focus now for a number of years. It is not good enough in the state of Indiana yet. That's all there is to it. My understanding, Seth will correct me on this if I'm wrong, I believe completion rates, again, not where they need to be, have roughly doubled since in the past 10 years, Seth.
I'm talking about retention for the scholarship students.
Oh, very good. So, and thanks for asking that. And this also leads to some of the strategies that we've been trying to deploy in the last few months, I know since I arrived. We began looking at the college going rate, college completion rate, or the retention, and what the outcomes look like. For low-income students, their college going rate is 30%. For the average student, it's 53% that we talked about. For 21st century scholars, it's 81%. What's really interesting then is to take the math out and say at what rate are they completing and have there been improvements in those. The low-income students who are not 21st century scholars complete at, I believe, 20%. 21st century scholars and the average student are now on par, upper 30s, 40%. High-income students are at 47%. Part of what I found very interesting not long ago in an interview process and then when we hired her was the work that Michelle Ashcraft was doing at Purdue University. Low-income students in the Purdue Promise program, principally our 21st century scholars there, are completing at 54% in their last numbers, 7% higher than high-income students in Indiana.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there
Yes, thank
because
you.
Purdue is the gold standard and they're hitting 54%. But you picked them. But in the other institutions, they're not even, they're half of that. And so, sure, I can understand a low-income student or a student of whatever your middle-income student, whatever you're saying, they have debt, they may have a responsibility. These are kids, free ride, you've embedded 20-some helpers, if you will, within the institutions. You're supposedly guiding them through high school. There's got to be a point where you're held more accountable for those students. And whether that means changing the funding and the way the program looks, those kids have to have some dual credit. So that's less time, less cost to us, and then with dual credit, we think there's a chance to stick, whether you take the counselors that you put into the colleges and they're in the high schools, so they hold those kids' hands ahead of time so they know exactly what is expected of them, what college is going to look like, or you fund a bridge program for all of those kids. But yeah, Purdue, but I would push back and say, of course, with Purdue, because they have such academic standards that the kids who actually got in, you would assume that maybe that they're going to be a little more qualified. You get other institutions, first gen, it's harder for them to keep those kids. There's a lot more going on there. And yet those dollars are just all being washed away. Millions and millions and millions of dollars that we're spending on kids, hoping they go to college. And if we do the automatic enrollment, they'll automatically all flow. But to what end? If you can't keep them and they don't graduate, then we just have a bunch of kids with no debt, but no skills.
Senator, thank you. One thing I wanted to quickly add is, I know you're aware of the Scholar Success Program, those items that high school students who are 21st century scholars must complete before they graduate in order to continue their eligibility through college. The first cohort of students who had 4 years of that program graduated in 2017. And so in our next 21st Century Scholars Report, we'll include fiscal 21 or 2020-2021 data that'll include that new cohort who had the full implementation of Scholar Success. So we're hoping to see improvement based off of those activities in high school.
I hope we do too, but I also think just as Purdue started looking at 3-year programs, I think these are the kinds of kids that we should be pushing them to take dual credit as part of the requirement, because that would make them understand the academic strength that they're going to need to fulfill a college degree. And at the same time, it would save the state money. And then you also need to be more flexible. Maybe some of these kids, because of their first gen or whatever they are, that when they come out, they're not really ready to go off and be an adult at 18. And so maybe there's a way to hold that money out for them. And then we actually get a 4-year degree out of the money we're spending. But having 10 kids go for 2 years with nothing is not, that's 20 years of tuition that has gone down the tubes. And we're not getting a very good success rate. So I'm open to anything, but thank you, I appreciate it.
Senator, thank you. And if I could, just a quick comment on dual credit. I so appreciate you bringing that up. One of the things that Secretary Jenner and I are trying to do is be highly intentional about the outputs with dual credit. Dual credit has increased rapidly over the last many years here in Indiana. And specifically, the General Assembly charged the commission several years ago with creating what is now known as the Indiana College Core. And it's that block of 30 hours. And what's so wonderful about it is it's fully transferable to any of our institutions. They have to take it. We have not leveraged that as a state the way we need to. As of a year ago this fall of 2021, there were approximately 80 high schools in Indiana offering that. As of this August, we were up to 140 out of 500. And what I have charged our new associate commissioner with doing, and she has created, I will tell you, quite a plan against it, is to reach all of those 521 high schools within 3 years. I don't know if it's attainable, but I think we owe it to our students because we know they have a much greater rate of success, as you're talking about. I want us to make sure that that is available to our students because in many high schools, they're this close to being able to offer that credential to the student, and the student just performs better. And again, I'll share with you from personal experience, the Batesville High School was one of the first in the state to adopt it. And to have seen, the success that has come to that rural school and now many others in that part of the state. In fact, Secretary Jenner's former school where she was a, administrator, I think the last I checked, those two rural high schools actually lead in the state. And they're just speaking from personal experience there, not just the data, that it makes it not only accessible, but with a much higher likelihood of students succeeding, like you're saying, perhaps in 3 years, or just making sure they perform better while they're there. So we're leaning into that. We didn't discuss that today, but we would love to sit down with you or anyone else and show you what we're thinking about and ask how we might improve on that. Thank you very much.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation this morning. And you hit on the dual credit that I was going to illuminate on, and as well as 21st century scholars in regards to the higher graduation rate for those low-income students. It's not where we want it to be, but it's moving in the right direction. On page 22 of your slide presentation, on the commissioner's summary, you talk about the programs that you have. And you talked about, Seth talked about the $40 million of pandemic that went toward those three programs under Workforce, Adult, and Earn, Indiana Work Study. And then he alluded that there's 17 programs that you were looking for $400,000 in staffing, which probably includes marketing also. Could you give me a number of those new programs that there are current programs of the 17 that are there, because you're looking for $400,000 for 17 new programs. Does that include marketing and communications in that also, or what? And I would just like to know that I like to have a list and valuable information of those 17 programs that are current, or those programs that would be new under this commission summary.
Representative, we'll absolutely get you that full breakdown of programs. That's analysis that we did very recently. I can name some of the major ones. The Workforce Ready Grant Program is obviously one that is fairly new to the state and to the commission. The Graduate Medical Education Board is staffed by the commission, which is roughly half of the FTE that we dedicate to that purpose. And then Next Generation Hoosier Educator Scholarship Program is another one of the major programs that are fairly new. Like I said, there are many of them. And to your point, the 17 new programs that have kind of been added over that last decade or so does not include the request here for like the marketing initiative. And that's why there's a separate specific staffing request to go along with the expansion that we're looking to do on marketing. But we'll get you the list of those programs and the breakdown of them. Absolutely.
And what's the time frame of giving that list? Because I don't want anybody to get amnesia.
How about today?
Okay.
And we'll try to add the years in which those were added.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's why I was just saying, why don't you send the copy so all the members can have that? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Oh,
Mr. Chair.
Gadora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, welcome aboard, and thank you for your public service. I have a couple of critical questions. For 2 years, I've been beating a dead horse in this committee and others, speaking about research that specifically the Indiana GPS project, and I'm not referring to the Department of Ed's GPS dashboard that recently launched, that shows that confirms what you said. We have a friendly business climate. We have a good tax system. However, we have been investing at the back end of the educational and workforce system. We have been spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to upskill people after they drop out of high school or don't go to colleges. And the research was conducted by the American Enterprise Institute, funded by Lilly Endowment, and the overseeing or supervising entity was CICP, the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. In that report, they referenced the READY grant, the $500 million READY grant. And they said, while we appreciate Indiana's investments in capital, we are not investing in humans. We're not investing enough to be more accurate. I was hopeful to hear a strategic vision from you today on behalf of CHE, because the biggest threat that I see to the future of the state of Indiana is a fragmented educational ecosystem that is not producing the results that we're looking for over the past 20 plus years. So every research I looked at that it tries to close the achievement gap, that tries to retain more students in K through 12 so that they can make it to colleges, talked about, for example, early education. Economists testified before this committee in the past saying early education is critical and we're not investing in it. The required age to go to school is 7 years old, and by 8 or 9, we're expecting them to have to be proficient in literacy and math. So my first question, sorry for the lengthy comment, is that when you hear the CEO of Lilly, when you hear small businesses saying, Indiana, you're not doing well, Indiana, you're not investing strategically, I was hopeful to hear a very bold vision to say, we need a couple of $1 billion, not to outspend our way or to deal with this issue, but when you read Michael Hicks' analysis from a couple of days ago that was posted in the IndyStar saying we're about $1 to $1.5 billion behind of where we need to be at on investing in higher ed. Retention strategies are not sufficient. The fragmentation of the strategy is not there. On my way to pre-Ks under FSSA, Department of Education dealing with K through 12, Commission on Higher Ed dealing with, higher ed, and then DWD is dealing with workforce development, and the governor's workforce cabinet dealing with this. And they recently created the Health Care Workforce Council to deal with workforce issues dealing with that. I hope that I made my point about fragmentation of government strategy on this issue. So I know that you're, by state law and by the mission of your office, you're focused on higher ed. What is the strategy? Where do we go from here?
Senator, I don't have all the answers, nor would I pretend to have them. But I think the strategy around thinking of this as an ecosystem, we're finding more and more that is where leaders in our state are headed. I think the report that was just recently issued by the governor's workforce cabinet starts to lay that out. It takes into consideration, I think in a more comprehensive way, the work of the different agencies that you referenced, plus some others. I think that has been good work that was done principally in the fall, listening to many of you, business leaders and others, to say, how could this be much more of a system? It's fair to say, too, that the leaders and teams of those different entities are working closely together to say, how do our strategies fit up? I referenced Secretary Jenner a month or so ago. Her senior team and our senior team met to literally look at a pipeline and say, what's our role? Where do we overlap? Where do we have synergies? How are we considering the needs of business and so forth? Also, I appreciate your comment about the GPS study, the AEI Brookings study. Yes. I thought it was a critically important one. I referenced just kind of in passing a while ago, automation, digitization, and so forth. that is where I took my comment from, the work they did. And I think it serves as a guidepost for what we're thinking about, what we're doing. CICP led the way on that. So what I would say to you is, the leaders of these different agencies, I think, and I've been around this for, well, a long time, including when I was in business, I think are trying to be as intentional as ever, I would say more intentional than ever. The Governor's Workforce Cabinet, I think, is helping to facilitate that. And, you and the other members of this committee have my commitment to continue to work in that vein, because I just want the best for our fellow Hoosiers and our state.
We appreciate you, and it would be unreasonable of me to expect that you only and you alone, in the I think you've been in office less than a year, to have the solution to all of these problems. So I hope that I didn't come across suggesting.
Not at all.
But you have amazing team that I met with over the summer, and we talked about bills. My final, just to wrap it up, two brief questions. So to tag along the first question, is there a documented strategy, not only meetings with DOE and with, FSSA, on my way to pre-K folks and so on, is there a documented strategy that we can point to that can show the state of Indiana's systematic approach to deal with this crisis?
Yeah, I think the best one at this point is the Governor's Workforce Cabinet recent, and just a few days ago, actually, is, I think, the best. Somebody else, Seth, you may have different thoughts on that, and others who come before you, from the other agencies and so forth. But I think that's a good place, and then complementing it with our respective, sort of more detailed agency strategies and plans, and certainly budget requests and so forth we're bringing to you.
I appreciate, and Mr. Ryan Kitchell is doing a great job, and I met with him and I reviewed the report and we talked about all of these things, and I look forward to supporting the recommendations of that report. My final question, I drafted legislation for this upcoming session, and I know maybe Senator Linda Rogers might be interested, and others, to deal with retention strategies. So I would just leave you with a note to your staff. Again, they've been very responsive. I appreciate them. I received no support or opposition to my legislation. It was neutral position. But I'll tell you, we can do things differently even without adding any new fiscal impact to the state. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. So one, when you look at the primary care scholarship, we are funding medical students year 1, 2, 3, and 4, and almost 50% of them leave the state. And we have the largest medical school in the nation, yet over 30 counties do not even have OBGYNs or psychiatrists. So among the things that I'm suggesting in my legislation, and I hope to get your team's support on this, is to restructure some of these programs to be that the state incentive is at the back end. Once folks graduate and are matched to stay in Indiana and they become employed in Indiana, then those same dollars can be given in the form of either loan forgiveness or refundable tax credits, and that will be a better hook to keep people in the state rather than take a 50% chance on people getting money and then leaving the state. Look at all of these programs from 21st Century to the Frank O'Bannon to the 200 slot cap on the Next Generation Hoosier Educators Scholarship when we have 600 people on the wait list. I think all of those funds and scholarships need a critical look. It does not necessarily mean we need to spend new money. I think we need a couple of $1 billion to get ourselves out of this crisis, but I urge your team to look into all of these retention strategies and look at it innovatively and strategically. And I look forward to supporting your team's effort because, again, in my perspective, what keeps me up at night, many things as far as public policy, but my blood has been boiling for 2 years serving on different committees, seeing the fragmentation of our public policy, and frankly, the politicization of higher ed. I've attended a couple of community meetings with elected officials from the General Assembly who would publicly say, universities and colleges are not for everyone, and it came in a political context. So that will counter your $5 million request of marketing when you have elected officials visiting communities and thinking that universities corrupt the minds of people. So I hope that that's our responsibility as legislators, we act responsible in the sense of promoting, helping you promote these messages. Thank you.
Senator, thank you for your questions. I look forward to reviewing the legislation,
Thank you.
any of you, and working together with
Thank
all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else? All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
So-
committee members, thank you.
We are 45 minutes behind, so we may not have lunch. I don't know. We'll see. So next up, I've got Ivy Tech, Dr. Elsperman.
Chairman
Whenever
Mishler,
you're ready.
our new Chair of House Ways and Means, Chair Thompson, great to see you. I'm happy to be here. I understand your time constraints, so I will move quickly. I want to just begin by saying, I hope you see through this presentation what an amazing job the General Assembly did in creating Ivy Tech as a statewide, singly accredited system that can be agile to Indiana's workforce needs. And I want to thank you for the support that you've given in the past. A particular thank you for the capital that you have provided. We're most appreciative for these investments. And I want to highlight one. You'll see here the Kokomo campus that was recently upgraded. As a result of that investment, Indiana and the Kokomo community was blessed to land a $2.5 billion EV plant. The CEO said during his comments that Ivy Tech was a primary reason for them locating here. Why? Because that campus has new Industry 4.0 labs, great classrooms, training facilities, and a faculty and staff to match. That $40 million investment you made in 2017 returned a 60-time ROI for that community. And I say that because it really signifies our work today with the IEDC, where Ivy Tech has been involved in 4 large projects in the last 6 months, including another big project you've heard about, which is Skywater, where Ivy Tech and Purdue are partnered very closely to ensure that the training of those technicians and above go as planned. So we see the importance of the technology and the quality of these facilities in order to meet the workforce and economic needs of Indiana. And so as we look at our asks, I want to share with you that as we think about capital and line item requests, they are always workforce aligned. We understand that is a key part of our mission. They're both focused and agile, meaning that we're developing programs at the agility and the rate that Indiana needs. And finally, we're always going to be focused on the workforce and economic development. So let me give you just a little bit of a picture of the last 7 years. The capital that you've approved in 17 and 19 bienniums really handled 3 campus needs. So Kokomo, I mentioned, Muncie, and most recently Columbus in the 2019 biennium. In fact, we just did the ribbon cutting on that beautiful new campus, October the 5th, Moravec Hall, and it is incredibly well-designed to meet the needs of the Columbus service area. So then let me fast forward to, as you know, there was no capital in the last biennium. However, Ivy Tech has continued to invest, and we've done that through leveraging grants, federal funds, philanthropy, and we've been able to fund a total of $40 million of additional capital over this time in places that are incredibly important. East Chicago, where we put in $12 million in technology, that is our site. It was incredibly important that we meet the needs of the students, the community, and the employers. Terre Haute, $1.2 million using a federal EDA grant on precision agriculture. Sellersburg, health sciences, $7.8 million. Indianapolis, we built a brand new automotive facility that was full in the first year. It was so critically needed. And then most recently, Elkhart's iFlex Lab, Industry 4.0, almost $4 million project there. So we have not stopped but we do need your help. And so I'm going to share with you our 2023 capital submission. These are 6 projects. They're all prioritized in order, most critical at the top. And as you know, with no capital the last biennium, the needs get more critical. Each of these focus on workforce programs, including nursing, health sciences, advanced manufacturing, and then unique needs in Evansville for automotive. When all 6 are completed, Ivy Tech will reduce, you heard Commissioner mention reductions, those projects would reduce another 600,000 square feet from Ivy Tech's footprint. We have just about met our million that I committed to 5 years ago. And so that is our commitment to right-size Ivy Tech, but we do have to have world-class labs and facilities to be able to do the welding, advanced manufacturing, Industry 4.0, nursing, biotechnology, and all those state-of-the-art programs. We don't need the same number of classrooms we needed in the past, given the hybrid, some online, et cetera. So we are constantly adapting with that. But honestly, we accepted some bad space, sometimes from this body, 10 years and more ago, and we have got to have the kinds of facilities that will attract the economic development and growth that our communities seek. And Representative Porter, so you don't have to ask this question later, 20% of our construction is XBE spend, and it'll continue to do that. That's the way we design it. So as we move forward, just speaking to how we've calibrated, each of these are calibrated directly to the regional needs. Indianapolis is nursing, health professions, industrial technology. Michigan City, nursing, health sciences, advanced manufacturing. Fort Wayne, nursing, health sciences, technology. Terre Haute, health sciences, business logistics, supply chain, IT, engineering. Evansville, as I mentioned, automotive. Anderson, nursing and welding. So those are our asks. They're all aligned exactly to Indiana's important workforce and economic development needs. We do have 2 line items that we're going to request, and the first is one of the most critical shortages our state is meeting, and it's nursing. We had a shortage before the pandemic, and it is much larger today. Many of you may not know that Ivy Tech's associate degree in nursing is the largest nursing program in the nation. Back to that singly accredited, we had at the time 18 campuses with ASN programs, which those students take the NCLEX, just like a 4-year nurse, and they become registered nurses in our hospitals. So $1,300 a year, it was not enough. Our trustees challenged us to do more. We went to every campus, including our newest 19th campus at Hamilton County, and said, what can we do to grow? That number was 600. So we will be nearly 2,000 nurses graduating a year, again, in a 2-year program, ASN program. That has been extremely well received by the healthcare industry, the hospital association. In fact, in order to make that growth, we needed to raise $21 million in one-time funds. To date, the Indiana Hospital Association, those healthcare facilities have brought forward 19.5 of that $21 million. We also had your great support last year and theirs with House Enrolled Act 1003, Nursing Indiana Back to Health, which gave us some flexibility with simulation and precepting and things that would allow us to grow more rapidly, and we're very appreciative of the near unanimous support of the General Assembly of that. I want to just very positively report that in less than a year, we have added 230 of those 600 additional students, and we've added 10 faculty positions. Now, however, in order to grow and maintain that 600 addition, it will cost us more in faculty. There is a 10-to-1 ratio of students to faculty members in a nursing program, and we cannot support at $150 a credit hour that amount. And so what we're asking for is a $9 million line item that will allow us to maintain and grow to this now almost twice the size of any other nursing program in the country in that ASN level. But incredibly important, very appreciated by our healthcare systems, and we very much hope that we can have your support. As you might guess, Ivy Tech is by far the lowest cost option for a nurse. Think about that. 2 years at Ivy Tech is less than $10,000, so very, very important. The second line item that we want to speak about is Ivy Plus Career Link. I shared with you back in 2018 and was in our strategic plan that we recognized that community colleges weren't designed to do career development. They were basically designed to take someone who walked in the door and kind of knew what they wanted to do next and skill them up to that. The fact is, many of our students don't know what they want to pursue when they come in that door, and they don't have the luxury of having 2 years or multiple semesters to figure it out. So we set about studying best practices in the country, not just for 2-year institutions, but 4-year institutions as well. We used Ascend Indiana in that help. Our own Commissioner Lowry was overseeing that project in that day. And we launched with the Lilly Endowment's help, along with Strata, the Commission for Higher Education, and other philanthropic supports, Career Link. That Career Link is now across all 19 campuses. It includes career coaches, talent connection managers, employer consultants, all working to ensure that every student from day one when they enter our doors are matched to those high-value career fields in their communities, critical in their communities. So they develop that. Not only do they get the career coaching up front for that program, but they develop portfolios, they're ready to interview, they're getting the work and learn opportunities. We bring that career awareness, exploration, preparation, and experience to them. Now here's the finding. In the time that we've had Career Link up, we've seen a 16% increase in retention. So retention's a key word here today, retaining those students, and we see our first-time students and students of color retained at significantly higher levels. It makes sense. These are the people who need that career support the most. They may not have parents who are in these other careers, and we're able to provide that for them. So we're very proud of Career Link. We are asking for an $8 million line item to continue to support that across the entire state. I would bring a point out that 93% of Ivy Tech students stay in Indiana. It's a great investment to make in our Hoosier students. So the next slide, it just describes, I always bring to you, who are the students that we serve. They look very different than our sister institutions. We're non-residential, and we serve primarily adult learners. You can see that 2/3 of our students are part-time, more than 40% are Pell eligible, another 40% have not filed a FAFSA. We're working on that. 37% are largely working adults. Many of them are those single parents. And of those, as you see in iPads and other data, only 8% are first-time, full-time students. We are working to bring a better equity to gender. We saw a good increase this year. In addition to increased enrollment this year, we see that we are now 56% female, 42% male. Most institutions are 60-40. We're beginning to close that gap. We're continuing to see good improvement with our African American students. The exception we have is we did not see the growth in our Hispanic population. They were the most impacted during COVID, and we are working hard to overcome gaps there. So we are cautiously optimistic in terms of enrollment. We've seen an 8% growth in our credit-bearing enrollment and 30% in our non-credit. Our next slide, and turn to that, is looking, there was much discussion with the Commission on dual credit. You might understand that Ivy Tech is the largest provider of dual credit in our high schools. We serve over 425 high schools and more than 67,000 students last year, more than 500,000 credits. All of that is important. The investment you make is the greatest value you can get in higher education. We know that more dual credit earners will go to college. Fewer of them will need remediation. And just, I'm going to share what is the big plus of this. We've been working closely with with DOE and the commission to improve completions while in high school. I think, Senator Brown, your point, having dual credit's important. It's even better if you have a completion while you are in high school. So this is the best story of all. If you look at this nearly exponential curve of completions on slide 13, you can see tremendous growth in all of those areas, from associate degrees, technical certificates. Look at the Indiana College Core, where we have completed last year over 1,800 students in high school completing that first year of college that will count as their first year of college across Indiana's institutions. This is incredible work, and we will continue to grow those completions. You know that we have a transfer mission. At Ivy Tech, we take that very seriously, and we are proud to transfer out every year. If you look at that number, over 6,100, you can see the flow of where they are going to which institutions. That's important to us for them to pursue and get a four-year degree. But if you'll look at the next transfer ins, this may be the surprising statistic, knowing that 2/3 as many students come to Ivy Tech after they've been at one of our four-year institutions because it didn't work out for whatever reason. It could have been academics, it could be that wasn't the right fit, the program they really wanted was at Ivy Tech, any number of things in life, but we want you to understand that we're there for both the first-time student and the student who comes back to us, and we want to help them achieve their goals with us. Now let me switch to the workforce arena. We fully embrace our workforce mission as well. Indiana is our Ivy Tech has more apprentices than just about anyone in the country, 8,000 overall. You can see 140 companies that we serve in what's really the gold standard of workforce training, that work and learn apprentice while you're gaining a college credential. Construction, manufacturing, healthcare are the largest. We also serve the 12 building trades, joint apprentice, and training committees, where we've, over the last years, over 20 years, more than 20,000 degrees have been earned by those electricians and carpenters and all those that are in the building trades. That apprentice model now also is happening at our hospitals as we scale up healthcare workers. And we work with some of our local providers like Indigo and Crew Car Wash and Byrider to scale up their workforces. Just a number for you to keep in mind: for every dollar invested in an apprentice, you get a 1.5 and almost $1.50 back in return as an employer. So we're very pleased with that. Ivy Tech was also awarded one of the nation's ERAP, which is expanding registered apprentice programs from the federal government. And we will continue our work in this area, as it's a very growing and good way to build talent and to keep them in Indiana. Ivy Tech continues to lead in and lean into our top industry sector, manufacturing, providing nearly half of all the credentials that are awarded in advanced manufacturing, and knowing that we have nearly 15,000 unfilled manufacturing jobs. Last year, we launched the nation's first Industry 4.0 associate degree and the stackable credentials beneath that. It is called Smart Manufacturing and Digital Integration. It is going to be critical to EV and semiconductor. It is the envy of the nation in the community college space, and it is exactly what Indiana needs to be able to continue to support our industry that's here and attract in companies like Samsung, Skywater, and others. And we will continue to scale that up across all 19 campuses as industry needs that. Again, that single accreditation allows us to do that. The Workforce Ready Grant was spoken to here. We're very proud of our participation in that. Again, the largest participant. Kudos to the General Assembly and the Commission for this very successful legislation in 2016. Over 5 years, more than 40,000 Hoosiers have enrolled in these high-wage, high-demand, short-term credentials, and more than 25,000 have completed. Further, less than 13,000 were paid by the state because those individuals, in completing a FAFSA, already qualified for Pell, which more than covered that in financial aid. And so you can see where the areas of those credentials were awarded. They were almost equally split between Indiana's key industry sectors, IT, healthcare, and manufacturing. We also know from CHE's research that these workers are making nearly $7,000 more a year as a result of that credential. So again, a great return on investment for the Hoosiers and the state of Indiana. So many of you know, big goal for Ivy Tech, aligned to that Lumina and Indiana's goal of 60% of our workforce having a post-secondary degree or credential by 2025, is we have set our bar on 50,000 completions. So as I arrived at Ivy Tech, that number is 21,000. We were over 41,000 this year, on our way to that 50,000 being the high watermark of what we need to do to contribute. And we will hopefully break that ceiling and go far beyond that in the next several years. But we're very proud of the work. You can see the credential production, associate degrees have remained level, but huge increases in those shorter term other credentials that are needed. Looks like we had the same challenge. I will keep going since you're 45 minutes behind. I want to speak to Ivy Tech and how we see our role. We see it as higher education revolution. We know that higher education is not where it needs to be. We know it needs to be reinvented, and we plan to be in the front row of that. So when we speak to how we want to change lives, what we can show you, and I hope you see in your packet on slide 22, that we change the lives of Hoosiers by 4 out of 5 of those who graduate from Ivy Tech have no college debt. Not some, but no college debt. That is truly amazing, and you can see over time we have been working. That is a great credit to this body. It is the state appropriation, it is federal financial aid, Indiana's generous scholarships and grants like the Workforce Ready Grant, and it's Hoosier employers who provide tuition assistance, encouraging their employees to skill up. It's all of those that allow those 4 out of 5 Hoosiers to graduate from Ivy Tech with no debt. We also believe that we need to make sure that every student has that ability to continue in their education and to remove the barriers of students, even when that student isn't coming back to us and even when they owe us debt. Late last year, we became the only institution in higher education in Indiana to release student transcripts. Over this past year, more than 2,500 students have received their transcripts, those past students, so they could go on to higher education anywhere. And we know that they've been doing that. Over 900 of them have enrolled at other institutions in Indiana, continuing their education because we released their transcripts. We believe this demonstrates Ivy Tech's commitment to Hoosier students and their success. Ivy Tech also introduced Ivy Plus in its first version. You'll hear Ivy Plus as sort of our special quality and innovation that we have. And Ivy Plus frozen tuition and free textbooks is something that we created based on the needs of students. In 2016, I saw firsthand the number of students who didn't and could not afford their textbooks. It became a quest to figure out how we could do that. We know the national research shows that 60% of students don't buy some or all of their textbooks. Being a predominantly 8-week institution now, it was incredibly important that our students had their materials on the first day of classes. And so I looked at the CFO, Dom Chase, and said, we've got to figure out how to get there, how to get to inclusive tuition. And we had seen only a couple of models in the United States, mostly with private institutions, that were doing this thing called inclusive, Well, we have gotten there. So Ivy Plus combines frozen tuition, so many of you know we did not raise tuition these last 2 years, a flat rate for the same amount for 12 credit hours or more, up to and including our accelerated programs where a student may take 24 credit hours in that ASAP program, all the same. We were able to do free textbooks and summer flex scholarships. So let me talk about a little more of that. You know, we were the beneficiaries of federal COVID emergency relief funds, and we chose to dedicate many of those funds to be able to do free textbooks for 2 years of our students, likely the only college in the nation to make that investment. You can see from our first year results, students saved over $34 million. We increased the part-time or the full-time students earning 30 credits per year. We improved the success in their courses, and we helped more than 1,000 students get to that 30 credit hours through our Summer Flex scholarships where they went for summer for free. These improvements of success rates are even better for our Hispanic, African American, adult, and Pell Student Aid students. Finally, both of our students and our faculty have expressed how much they love this Ivy Plus tuition and textbook model because it really leans into doing what's right for students and helping them succeed. And then the final Ivy Plus that I will share with you today is where we're going. It's our Ivy Plus IT Academy. It's the most recent innovation. We all know the huge demand for IT talent. Ivy Tech this spring will be launching the IT Academy, working to provide the accelerated boot camp type training, and partnering with Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, and those most critical credentials that employers need in their workforce. This will be the most current and market-relevant IT training, engaging employers and our students to gain those industry certifications and career preparation. So we are working and have a long line of major employers who can't wait for this to launch, and we will share more on that next time we see you. We do plan on scaling that across all 19 campuses, 40 locations at employers and in our Indiana communities, so stay tuned. At Ivy Tech, we are driven to operate in the real world, not the world of higher education. We know that Indiana and Hoosiers are counting on us. We're not tied to the old models. We're going to continue to rethink, reinvent, and to revolutionize them so that we can make Indiana the kind of state, the economic success that our employers are seeking, our Hoosiers are seeking, and the Indiana economy is seeking. So thank you, and I look forward to any of your questions.
Any questions? Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, President Esselman, for that, your presentation. I have a couple questions.
Sure.
I need a point of clarification. You said that you're in 425 high schools in dual credit, but...
And career centers as well.
And career centers. So I think the commissioner, he indicated there were only 180 high schools with dual credit?
No, I think he might have been speaking to the Indiana College Corps, offering the Indiana College Corps possibly. Yes.
Oh, okay. I missed that transition.
Yes, and we are working hard to help, and we see many more high schools coming on every year as they understand the value of the Indiana College Corps beyond what we used to call random acts of dual credit. Dual credit's good, but getting a credential, finishing that freshman year while you're in high school so that, as Senator Brown said, you can finish college in 3 years is amazing. And we are working with those high schools, including working side by side with the Commission for for the Department of Education with Crossing the Finish Line last summer, using some of their federal funds to help students continue to take those high school dual enrollment classes over the summer.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions, Mr. Chairman, please. I think on 13, your slide presentation 13, you talked about the 6,181 transfers out, and I see Purdue and all these. Does this include the regional campuses when it comes to
Yes.
14%?
Yes.
Is there a way to disaggregate that data?
We sure
to say
could.
these are going to the regional campuses versus the
I
main campuses?
think we can get that data.
I mean, if.
We will provide it to all of you.
'Cause, yeah, I think that's important, and just to know for regionalization of our institutions. And last but not least, we saw the presentation from the Commissioner on Higher Ed, and my question is to you. What are your thoughts on the Commission's budget recommendations?
So we support the movement towards prospective funding, right? But at Ivy Tech, we have, as you saw, our improvements and completions have been tremendous. We would hope to be held harmless because we did the work these last years and would hope to receive that as we move into prospective funding. So we are working with the commission. We think the new formula is promising, and we will continue to work with the commissioner and team to work in that direction, but hope to see that Ivy Tech would, for the work we've done, would see that in our performance funding this year.
Senator Brown?
Chairman. So you said that a large percentage of graduates graduate without debt, but how many have debt who didn't graduate? Do you have that number? And you probably don't have it now. You can get it.
We would be happy to get it for you. It's very small when you look at us compared to other institutions. When your entire 4,500.
I appreciate that. I just want yours.
But we'll
I don't
happily
need
get
the
that for you.
comparison. I also, you forgave a number of, so the kids could transfer their transcripts. So what, you can get me the number of monies that
It
you.
is not forgiven. It is allowed to, this is a practice of higher education, is if you do not have a payment plan or are not paying us for being there, that we would not release transcripts to you. That
Okay,
was a
well-
way to, so we will still try to pursue that payment, but believe that those students who complete degrees will be in a better position to pay us back
Well,
than those who do not.
Then you'll be able to tell me what your payback is and how that works.
We will, absolutely.
So with respect to the free textbooks that use COVID dollars for 2 years, are you planning on continuing that in your budget?
We are looking to, so with the help of our financial team, we have negotiated rates with the publishers and the bookstore companies to $19 a credit hour, and we're going lower than that when we sign the next agreement. So we're continuing to drive that down. We're using OER and many other ways we have truly driven out millions of dollars in cost, even if we have to charge $19 or $17 a credit hour, while we are still looking for funding sources to see how we might be able to continue keeping it free.
So the credit hour, you're assessing each student a fee per credit hour
We would be, yes. They've not done that yet,
for
but
the
that would be the plan.
textbook. So is that then covered by financial aid, Pell, 21st Century, et cetera? Federal, not state. So unlike me as a student going and paying tuition and then buying books for whichever particular classes I have, some more expensive than others,
yeah.
you're rolling it all in on this side.
Yes, just a notion, that students can opt out of using that model, but it is so affordable. If any of you have paid for textbooks.
So we're paying for the textbooks.
No, I said if any of you have
No,
children
but
and
I'm
you've paid by
saying, as
textbook.
opposed to the student
today.
now currently paying a textbook
Yeah,
fee,
I'm going to let Dom.
it's going to be on the tuition side.
So the model moving forward would be assessed as a non-mandatory fee, so the student can take advantage of the savings that we're able to negotiate by becoming a bulk purchaser on behalf of the student body. We're really able to drive down those prices so it makes sense and is affordable for the entire student body.
Right,
So
but my question is, if I opt into it, am I paying the textbook and my tuition, or is it all rolled into my tuition package?
it's separate, and that's a requirement of the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education, so that the student can see exactly in a transparent way what you're charging, so they can make the decision if they want to seek the textbooks elsewhere, like go to the library and check them out and see if it's more affordable.
So
for
if
them.
I receive a scholarship from the state, I still then will have to pay the lower cost, but the textbook fee?
For the Franco Bannon Grant and 21st Century Scholars, it currently does not cover the cost of textbooks. It's excluded. However, if those need-based students receive federal Pell, they can use the Pell money to cover the textbook fee.
Okay, and then my final question is about this summer high school IT academy. Wouldn't this be better offered by the high schools?
It is meant for, we will have summer IT academies for high school students, but many of these will be adults. And they'll be offered in the spring for 4 weeks for gaining a credential. You know, it'll be a very different model than what you would see. It won't follow the 8-week terms that we have. It'll be designed for the employer or for a group of students that are and summer IT for high school is just a subset of the IT Academy, because we believe there is a really good opportunity to expose our high school students and attract them into these IT professions in that model.
Well, I know some states require computer science classes. I know we have, I think, suggested it. Maybe I'm mistaken. I think there was a bill to suggest it. So I'm just curious if we shouldn't just be promoting that across the board in our K-12 education.
These are much more practical. These are credentials that they can use to get a job in IT, where a computer science class would be one class amongst a 4-year degree that they might complete in 4 more years.
I don't disagree that the businesses that are here in the state, or businesses that may be interested in the state, would like us to have the people doing this, but I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be better for the business to come to us and then receive some sort of, on the back end, tax credit or something for them attaining that, as opposed to giving you money to train a bunch of people, and then hopefully that they transfer that skill to actually a job at a higher level within the state, because you don't have that link right now. In other words, if you have AWS, Salesforce, are they then committed to working for that company after they receive?
Oh, no, those are credentials that we're offering for in those areas. So almost all companies use Microsoft, Google, and Salesforce. Ivy Tech use Salesforce for our admissions. We need people who are trained in the skills to operate that software, right? And that's what these credentials do, is we bring that skilled employee to be able to operate those kinds of software programs and deliver that kind of, whether software development, et cetera, for the company in those arenas.
Right, thanks.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Senator Cadora?
I have very 2 quick questions. The first, thank you for your presentation. Looking at the slides from 2022 or any previous years, the associate degrees, how many of those degrees were in general education?
The continuing to go down because of the career coaching, right? We're doing more and more of that upfront so we can get that student into even the associate degree that they're seeking, and where a TSAP, that design 2+2 is in place. There are still places where a student has a specialized interest in a bachelor's degree that they may need to stay in the general studies kind of program because there is no TSAP.
I appreciate that.
And yes, we'll provide you those numbers.
Thank you. I think one of the feedbacks that I received was the alignment of the general education when students enroll in university and then they have an interest in a specific topic, and some of those courses might not count. So it kind of, takes away the whole purpose of investing in an associate degree if they're going to spend more time and money at a 4-year college. But I would appreciate the statistics if you don't mind. The second and final question, on the Workforce Ready grant currently covers the first year and maybe an associate degree.
It's short-term credentials,
Just
1 year, up to 1 year.
Because and I'll double check with LSA, I suggested to cover a second-year associate degree, and I was told that it currently does, so I need to double check that. But my legislation for next session is going to expand it to fully cover up to an associate degree. My question to you, would it be helpful to also go back and cover also senior year high school students who might be interested in a certification from Ivy Tech, to cover some of the certificates early on, so by the time they graduate from high school, they have a certificate to apply?
So the high schools already receive CTE funding for those certificates, so they're receiving that. And often Ivy Tech is providing that, or we are doing the credentialing for their teachers to do that through either dual credit or dual enrollment. So I would say the state is already paying for the CTE portion in high school. The summer crossing the finish line has been for summer programming, where some students would have the additional time and availability to continue to skill up outside their normal high school. I believe those programs would be very desirable, and I believe the the Department of Education has been using some of their federal funds, which will run out after the
Excellent.
next summer.
So would it be helpful if we expand the Workforce Ready program to cover a 2-year associate degree?
Well, the Workforce Ready program is designed to do the shorter term.
Correct, I understand.
So if it were expanded to do, for instance, the Industry 4.0, Smart Manufacturing, Digital
Yes.
Integration degree, those would be possibilities that would, and again, I would look to employers. The Governor's Workforce Cabinet makes the decisions on what credentials are offered. That's certainly in the purview of this body.
Correct. So please let me know later. It doesn't have to be in this committee, but I talked to folks and they told me that it would be helpful to increase the number of people getting associate degrees. If that's the case, please let me know, and I would be more than happy to include it in my bill and do the best job to convince Senator Mishler to help me with that.
Well, Senator, just so you are familiar that virtually all of those short-term credentials that we offer do stack into an associate. So if it's a technical certificate, they can stack it to an associate and then associate to bachelor's. So it all is going to move. Those Hoosiers who want to continue to skill up and improve their wage outcomes, as you heard from the commissioner, they can do that
Excellent.
with that Ivy Tech base.
Thank you for your service. I appreciate it. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair.
Anyone else? All right.
Thank you.
Next is Dr. Mearns in Ball State.
Well, good afternoon. I have the great good fortune to serve as the president at Ball State University, but I'm in the unenviable position of having to talk through lunch. So I'm going to go through my slide presentation relatively quickly. If I move too quickly and you want me to pause, I'm happy to do that, and also certainly happy to answer your questions as we go through. On the next slide is just a quick outline of the presentation. I'm going to first share just a few slides that demonstrate the impact that our university is having on our community and a focus of our strategic plan, which is to serve the people and the businesses and the schools here in Indiana. Then I'll share a few observations about our request for the upcoming budget session, and then finish with a few more ways in which we're serving our communities, I think, in distinctive and impactful ways. We are proud at Ball State to be the public research university that focuses on the state of Indiana. This fall, we enrolled approximately 20,000 students. About 90% of our on-campus undergraduate students are from Indiana, and they come from every county in the state. With respect to our fall 2020 freshman class, the one that just enrolled this past August, we actually saw a 6 to 7% increase in the number of new freshmen who enrolled. We're not yet back up to the pre-pandemic levels, but we're on that pathway to have our enrollment be relatively stable to what it was before the pandemic. More than 90% of the new freshmen are from Indiana. More than 30% are first generation in their families to go to college. And the high school GPA, the median average high school GPA of the freshman class was 3.56, which is the highest in the history of Ball State University. But as you see, many of them have substantial financial need. They're either Pell eligible or 21st century scholars. So we're pleased with the academic quality, the diversity of the freshman class, but also that it continues to be primarily here from Indiana. We now have more than 200,000 living alumni, and 70% of them, 160,000 of them approximately, live and work here in Indiana. And again, in every county, in the largest cities in the state, but also in the small cities and towns all across the state of Indiana. Our graduates work for some of the largest employers, but they also work for, lead, and create small businesses in communities across the state. And as we've grown, as you see on the next slide, we also have preserved our original mission, which is to prepare teachers and educators to serve and educate the children all across the state. Today, our graduates serve as teachers, counselors, and administrators in large and small school districts across the state. But in just a moment, I'm going to talk about how, again, 30%, more than 30%, of our students are first in their family to go to college. Many of these students lack the social capital to engage with prospective employers. These students, of course, believe in the transformative power of higher education. That's why they've decided to enroll in college, but they need more support from us to realize their full potential. And that's why we've developed a set of comprehensive and coordinated initiatives to help all of our students to help all of our students achieve their professional potential. And I'm just going to briefly touch on just a few of these steps on the ladder to a fulfilling career. But I think what is distinctive about our program, and I hope that you will take away, is we have a very intentional and strategic approach to preparing students for fulfilling careers and to engage them with employers, large and small, all across the state. It begins at orientation. We don't now ask a student what she wants to major in. We ask them, what kind of career are you interested in? What kind of career would you find fulfillment? And we start with that conversation to guide them into a major. With Skills Infusion, which is a distinctive program that we actually have our faculty serve as summer interns in industry so that they can learn what employers are looking for, so that they can incorporate those skills and learning outcomes in the courses that they teach. To help our faculty achieve this objective, our faculty serve as externs, and then through our Career Ready program, the faculty incorporate those career-related activities and outcomes in their curriculum. We provide students mock interview opportunities, and our career coaches help our students explore those options throughout their career at Ball State. We now have a new Indiana Connections Lounge. The Commission for Higher Education, the members actually had a tour of that, and it's a convenient, informal place where our students can meet with prospective employers. And then we've created an Indiana Connection experience, which we think is distinctive. We invite an employer to design a day for them on campus. Instead of that usual career fair where prospective students meet with prospective employers and go table to table, we actually design an intensive day on campus for large employers, and we're expanding the program for mid-sized businesses, not just in East Central Indiana. This evening, Senator Brown, as you may know, we're heading to Fort Wayne to open a small office in Electric Works, a new mixed-use development project, a former General Electric plant. We are not building satellite campuses, but we're building satellite locations where we offer a limited number of academic programs, but where it really is a platform for our students to have opportunities to get internships and externships in the community. So now I want to then quickly turn to our requests with respect to operating appropriations. And we have 3 requests, and they align with the Commission's recommendations that the Commissioner shared with you this morning. But I'm going to begin in a slightly different order. We're going to encourage you to support an increase in every institution's current operating appropriation to help all of us deal with inflation. This would be an across-the-board adjustment. It's the one the Commissioner spoke about. I'm also going to speak about the Commission's recommendation for additional new funds through the legacy or pre-existing funding formula, and then talk about the Commission's request for prospective funding. With respect to the first request, the adjustment for inflation, there are 4 factors that I'd like you to consider. I know this is true at Ball State. I suspect it's true at every institution in the state. There has been a disparity for at least a decade between inflation and the very modest increase in operating appropriations for each institution. At our institution, we've addressed those challenges by adjusting our expenses, to adjust our expenses to align with our enrollment, and so as not to shift that burden onto the backs of our students and their families. And then your support will enable us to continue to produce a great return on the investment. So I'm going to move through these slides quickly to just illustrate that point. It shows that over the last 15 years, on an annual basis, our university's operating appropriation has been less than 0.5%. This chart then shows that modest increase compared to CPI over that same period and HEPI. HEPI is the Higher Education Price Index. It is the basket of goods and services specifically for colleges and universities. While our increase has been less than 10%, CPI has increased by nearly 50%, and HEPI has increased by more than 50%. At the same time, we have not increased tuition to stay up with inflation. As you see in this chart, we have for more than a decade kept our rate of rate of increase in tuition and mandatory fees less than the Commission's recommendation. And I believe other than Purdue, we may be the only institution that has that record for over 10 years. Now, here's a chart that actually shows the tuition and mandatory fees increase over a 10-year period since fiscal year 2013. Over that period of time, our tuition and mandatory fees has increased only about 15%, but both CPI and HEPI have increased more than 30%. Just to put that in context, if we had raised our tuition and fees just to keep pace with inflation, instead of tuition at about $10,000 a year for an in-state student, our tuition would be nearly $12,000. So, but here's the chart that I know many of you are interested that we've shared with you before. And Senator Mishler, I think this responds in part to the question you asked earlier. Here's a chart that shows the combined impact of our commitment to low tuition increases plus our reduction of expenses. And what it shows is that over the last decade, we've only expended about 1% more for each degree that we've conferred. And the degree, of course, is the ultimate outcome. It's not just enrollment, it's about your productivity, how many of those students actually graduate. So that we've only increased the cost of a degree by 1% over 10 years, even though CPI has gone up 16% and HEPI has gone up nearly 22%. That demonstrates our efficiency, and the way we've been able to do it is we've reduced costs. We had a voluntary early retirement incentive package for our faculty, but we continue to have to face increases in costs like healthcare and utilities. This final slide illustrates that if our operating appropriation had simply kept pace with inflation over that 15-year period, our operating appropriation would be $40 million more than it is this year. So I think taken together, these slides present a clear, compelling case for an inflation adjustment, the base adjustment that Commissioner Lowry spoke about. And I suspect that if you look at the aggregate slides for all of higher education in the state, it would paint a similar picture, and I suspect each institution could show a similar trajectory. Now, with respect to the legacy funding model or using the retrospective funding model, we're grateful that the Commission has recognized that reallocation, using the formula for reallocation, is producing some counterproductive or counterintuitive results, I should say. And that secondly, one of the things that then when we were in the study group, you heard from virtually all of the presidents and university representatives, which is that reallocation actually pits and causes institutions to compete with one another. If we're going to reach our higher education attainment goals, we want institutions to cooperate with one another and not to compete for students. And I'm going to go quickly just to illustrate the point. This slide shows that the 4-year on-time graduation rates for the main campuses are all showing improvement. The next chart then shows that the combined on-time completion rate for degree-seeking students in clusters. The red are IU Bloomington, Purdue West Lafayette, and Ball State. The gray is all of the other main campuses plus the branch campuses of IU and Purdue. And the blue shows the 2-year institutions, the completion rates, on-time completion rates for the 2-year institutions in industry clusters. And as you see, all of them have shown improvement over the last 8 to 10 years. But this chart shows by those same sectors the increase in operating appropriation across those same sectors. And what it shows is there's an inverse relationship between actual on-time performance versus the increase in state appropriation. And this result is primarily the product of reallocation. And Senator Mishler, I'm grateful for your concern about the impact of reallocation. My only suggestion is that, as you say, if there is new money, and that there should be reallocation, but it shouldn't be based upon performance improvement, which is what the current or legacy formula was, but actual objective performance. So now I then just want to talk very quickly about the prospective funding that the Commissioner spoke about. For us, that funding should be designed, as the Commissioner said, to help all of us make progress towards our state educational attainment goals. We believe that if those resources are funding, that all of us, including at Ball State, should invest those dollars in 2 significant challenges that every institution in the Indiana and really every institution across the state is facing, which is one, as a result of the pandemic, our students are coming not as well prepared as they were prior to the pandemic. If you think about it, our incoming freshmen, the students who enrolled this fall, their sophomore year was interrupted by the pandemic, and their junior and senior year, their educational experience was probably suboptimal. And second, we know that the lingering impact of the pandemic is having on the mental health of our students. I'm going to shift then to our principal capital request. As you saw in the commissioner's slide, it relates to the North Campus building renovation. You see the details there. It's really about converting these learning spaces into 21st century learning spaces. We are one of the 5 institutions that the commissioner mentioned. All of the dollars that you would ask us to invest, or that we would ask you to invest, would be dollars in existing buildings that would enable us to expand the life and modernize buildings that were funded by the state several decades ago. Now, just a few final slides that I want to share with you that demonstrate our strong and abiding commitment to serving our local and regional communities. And I want to talk about 2 distinctive initiatives. One is our partnership with the Muncie Community Schools and our plan to revitalize an important commercial district that in Muncie, immediately adjacent to our campus. You'll probably recall that when House Enrolled Act 1315 was passed and signed by the governor in 2018, it gave us the responsibility, and I often say the opportunity, to resuscitate our local public school system. And in 4 years and change, the new school board and the new administration with Dr. Leanne Kwiatkowski have stabilized enrollment, they've balanced the budget, and they've increased the compensation to recruit, retain, reward high-performing teachers. Because of the partnership, we've also generated an unprecedented level of philanthropic and grant funding. With respect to philanthropy, you see $5 million in philanthropic investments. $4 million of that was generated in the first 2 months of the partnership in 2018. With respect to grant funding, you see the total there of $12.9 million. 2 grants that I want to just mention to you. One was $8.1 million from the Indiana Department of Education. It's to provide early childhood education. We've been talking about the importance of the pipeline and preparation. It's early childhood education and literacy education in the 3 elementary schools that are in the most socioeconomic challenged neighborhoods in Muncie. We also received a $1.5 million grant from the United States Department of Education to improve civic education in the middle schools and the high schools, to teach history, geography, government, and media literacy. The next 2 slides clearly demonstrate our commitment to recruiting, retaining, and rewarding outstanding teachers and staff. This is as the product of balancing the budget and allocating resources for priorities, as well as the General Assembly's increase in compensation. As you can see, the starting teachers made about $34,000 in 2017, the year before we started. Starting teacher who started in August now makes $48,000. That's an increase of more than 30%. Then, as you see on the next slide, this is for returning teachers and staff. In the 10 years prior to the partnership, the teachers and staff in the Muncie Community Schools had not received an increase in compensation in 10 years. Since then, in every year of the new partnership, the teachers and staff have received either a one-time pay supplement, a recurring salary increase, or both. And in just 4 years, there's been more than a 30% increase in compensation for outstanding teachers and staff. And as a result, on what you see on the next slide is a dramatic increase in the retention of teachers. Prior to the partnership in 2017, only 67% of the teachers actually returned to teach classes in the fall of 2017. Just imagine that 1/3 of the teachers who were in the classroom in May were not in the classroom in Muncie Community Schools in the next August. Now that teacher retention rate has gone up to 88%. The impact of balancing the budget and your investment in teachers. Now, briefly, I want to share our plan to revitalize the village. The commission was on our campus a few months ago and had an opportunity to tour the existing village and to see our vision for investing in the village. You'll see on the slide our goals, which really are to attract and retain students and employees, to complement the revitalization work that is happening in downtown Muncie, and to enhance and increase economic opportunities for all citizens. So we're going to raise about $40 to $45 million of philanthropy to design, build, and operate a new performing arts center, which will be a catalytic agent to bring people of all demographics and all ages to the village. And as a result of our investment through the philanthropy of our alumni and benefactors, it will leverage an investment of about $100 million in the village that you see on the sites there. And so in a few years, when you return to campus, this is what the village will look like as a result of our investment in the community. And then my final slide is we have a line item that enables us to do the creative and innovative things that we're doing with respect to career counseling, the innovative and creative work, and I think impactful work that we're doing with our local school system, and will enable us to continue to hire and retain outstanding faculty and staff. So finally, we actively recruit the vast majority of our students from Indiana. We strategically and intentionally prepare them for fulfilling careers right here in Indiana. We educate teachers for school districts all across Indiana, and we invest programmatically and financially in the communities that we serve. Trying to get you caught up, Chairman.
Good. Hey, two questions, though. Was it last year, the day before we came to campus and we toured the architecture, School of Architecture? A neat building, but I remember it was in pretty bad shape.
Yeah,
I'm
so
looking-
I'm sorry to
Well, I'm looking
interrupt.
at page 10 on your 81.6 million. Is that to rebuild the entire building or to, remodel?
It's more to upgrade, to fix some of the systems, and to improve some of the classrooms and teaching spaces. Also, if you've seen it, there's a very unattractive glass portion on the south-facing side. That will be removed and upgraded. Of the 81 million, about 28 million will be to modernize and upgrade the CAP building, but it's not a brand-new building.
Well, I thought the windows were pretty cool myself, but obviously they leaked and they're high maintenance and all that, but I think that's so you're going to rip all that out.
Yes.
Okay. Second question was, going back to page 7, you talk about your cost increase per degree. So my question would be, so what's the cost per student that quits? So you obviously incur costs on students that leave. Now, if they transfer to another school, I get it, but I'm just talking if they leave for any other reason, what does that look like?
Well, that's actually embedded in that figure. So it's a relatively simple calculation.
You average it out. I
Yeah.
follow you.
So that's why if we can actually increase our degree productivity, that number actually even will go down even further. So it incentivizes us to improve retention and on-time graduation. And then I know, Senator Brown, you were asking earlier about one of our key metrics on our executive dashboard for our board is the percentage of students who borrow, the percentage of students who are current repaying their loan, and the percentage of students who have defaulted on those loans. And we're actually seeing some good improvement. We have pretty good loan repayment rates already, very low default rates, but we've actually seen a reduction in that default rate. And it's something that our board is very much focused on, is improving retention, because the worst outcome is a student with no degree and some debt, right? So it's the intersection of the two. And that's where, we're actually at the point where by continuing to hold costs steady, we're actually running the risk that that's going to impede our ability to continue to show improvement in terms of retention and graduation. We're not quite there yet. We're always looking for ways to become increasingly efficient. But when utility rates are going up at the rate that they are, healthcare premiums and the like, all of the things that all of you have to deal with in your own businesses or your own life.
Any questions for Dr. Mearns? Senator Brown?
Real quickly, thank you. I just want to comment on the Muncie Community Schools. I was on the committee years ago when everyone was predicting Armageddon, and you have done an amazing job in terms of retaining teachers and increasing their salaries. And if you can't retain your teachers, then it's going to be pretty hard to improve the quality of students. So you don't get enough credit for that. You didn't get any money for that, and you've done an amazing job, because I think Ball State is the teacher education school in our state. But I just have to mention, you are asking for $4.5 million for your entrepreneurial academy, and I can't go without. Are you still asking for the $5 million line item for your high school science academy?
We are for the Indiana Academy. Yes,
Yes.
I don't think we're asking for. Senator, yeah, the one that I mentioned in my presentation is not the Indiana Academy.
I know, but we've had ongoing conversations,
Yes.
and we're going to continue.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Yes,
That's all.
thank you, Senator.
So basically, you're asking for 2 million additional per year for the entrepreneurial program.
Yes, sir.
That might answer your question there, Senator Brown. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you
Dr.
very much.
Burns. Okay, so we've notified everybody that we're going to move everything back an hour. So the next presentation will start at 2 to get, now, I didn't know Dr. Mearns would get us up 15 minutes after we did, but we had to notify the afternoon group. Yeah, a little compensation for that. We had to notify the afternoon folks that, to give them an updated time. So we'll have USI at 2 o'clock. So if we can reconvene at 2 o'clock. Thank you.